I never thought I'd end up working the night shift at a place like this. The Sunset Rest Motel sits alone on a stretch of highway that most people only use to get somewhere else. The neon sign flickers, buzzing like a dying insect, and the parking lot is a patchwork of cracked asphalt and oil stains. I pulled in just after sundown, my car's headlights sweeping over a row of faded doors, each one painted a different shade of peeling blue. I killed the engine and just sat there for a minute, listening to the wind rattle the motel's battered flagpole. I told myself it was just another job, just a paycheck I desperately needed. But even then, I felt something watching me from the shadows between the rooms. The lobby was smaller than I expected, with a faded carpet that smelled faintly of mildew and cigarettes. A single lamp cast a yellow pool of light over the front desk, where a thick logbook sat open, its pages curled and stained. I ran my finger along the edge, half expecting to find it sticky. The air was heavy, like the place hadn't been aired out in years. There was a bell on the counter, but I didn't ring it. I could hear voices, muffled, low, coming from somewhere down the hallway, but when I looked, the corridor was empty. I tried to shake off the nerves. I needed this job. Rent was overdue, my phone was full of ignored calls from my landlord, and my last paycheck had barely covered groceries. I told myself I could handle a few weird guests and a little loneliness. But as I waited for the manager, I started noticing things that didn't add up. The guest log was filled with names, but some were scratched out so violently the paper was torn. Others were written in shaky, almost childlike handwriting. One entry just read Room 7, Don't Disturb in red ink, underlined 3 times. A door creaked somewhere behind me, and I caught a glimpse of a guest slipping out of their room, moving too quickly, head down, as if afraid to be seen. I watched as they hurried past the window, never looking up. That's when I realized everyone here was following their own set of rules. And I had no idea what any of them were. The manager finally appeared, emerging from a back office that looked more like a storage closet. He was a thin, grey man with deep lines etched into his face, the kind of tired that seeps into your bones and never leaves. His name tag read Stan, but the letters were faded, almost illegible. He didn't smile when he saw me, just gave a curt nod and gestured for me to follow him behind the desk. "First night?" he asked, not waiting for an answer. He slid a battered binder across the counter, its plastic cover warped from years of use. "Here's the basics. Check-ins, check-outs, keep the coffee fresh, and don't let anyone in after 2 a.m. unless they already have a reservation. The register's old, but it works. If it jams, just smack it on the side." He rattled off the instructions in a monotone, barely pausing for breath. I tried to keep up, nodding along, but my eyes kept drifting to the logbook and the strange entries inside. Stan noticed. He closed the binder with a snap and leaned in, lowering his voice. "Look, I know this place is different. You'll see things that don't make sense. Guests who act strange. Rooms that feel colder than they should. Don't ask questions. Don't get involved. Just do your job and keep your head down." I tried to laugh it off, but he didn't join in. Instead, he fixed me with a stare that made my skin crawl. "I'm serious. The guests here, they have their own rules. Some of them are harmless. Some aren't. You'll figure out who's who soon enough. But whatever you do, don't interfere. Don't try to help. Don't try to stop them. Respect their rules, even if you don't understand them. If you don't, you'll regret it." He straightened up, glancing nervously at the clock on the wall. "If you hear knocking from room 7, ignore it. If someone leaves a note at the desk, don't read it out loud. And if you see a guest standing in the parking lot, staring at the highway, just let them be. They'll come back inside when they're ready." I wanted to ask what he meant, but he was already moving on, showing me how to work the ancient coffee machine and where to find the spare towels. The whole time, he kept glancing over his shoulder, as if expecting someone, or something, to appear behind him. When he finished, he handed me a ring of keys, each one tagged with a room number. "You'll be fine if you keep to yourself. Most nights are quiet. Just remember, don't break the guests' rules. And don't let your curiosity get the better of you." He checked his watch, then gave me a look that was almost pitying. "I'll be back at sunrise. If you need anything, don't call me. Just handle it. Or don't. Sometimes it's better to do nothing at all." With that, he slipped out the front door, leaving me alone behind the desk. The silence settled in, thick and heavy. I stared at the logbook, at the strange names and cryptic notes, and wondered what kind of place I'd just signed up for. After Stan left, I tried to convince myself it was just nerves. Every new job feels strange at first, right? I busied myself with the basics, wiping down the counter, flipping through the binder, and making a pot of coffee that smelled more like burnt rubber than anything drinkable. The clock above the desk ticked louder than it should have, each second stretching out in the empty lobby. The first guest I saw was a woman in room 4. She never came to the front desk, not even to ask for extra soap or a wake-up call. I only knew she was there because I'd seen her car, a faded green sedan with out-of-state plates, parked in the same spot every night. Sometimes, I'd catch a glimpse of her through the window, sitting perfectly still on the edge of her bed, staring at the wall. The curtains were always drawn, and the TV was always on, but I never heard a sound from her room. Not once. Around midnight, a man in a threadbare suit shuffled into the lobby. He didn't say a word, just slid his key across the counter and waited while I checked him in. His hands shook as he signed the logbook, and he kept glancing over his shoulder, as if expecting someone to follow him. When I handed him his key, he nodded once and disappeared down the hall. Later, I saw him through the window, pacing the parking lot in slow, deliberate circles. I checked the time, 3:13 a.m. exactly. He did it every night, always at the same time, always the same number of laps. I tried not to stare, but it was hard not to watch. Then there was the woman in room 9. She called the front desk every hour, on the hour, asking for fresh towels. I'd bring them to her door, knock, and leave the stack on the mat. She never opened the door while I was there, but in the morning, the towels would be gone. When I checked the laundry, they were always untouched, still folded, still clean. I started to wonder if she was even using them at all. The routine should have been comforting, but it wasn't. Every task felt like a test, every interaction loaded with unspoken rules I didn't understand. The guests moved through the motel like actors in a play, each following their own script, never deviating, never acknowledging each other. I tried to focus on the paperwork, on the hum of the vending machine, on anything but the growing sense that I was the only one here who didn't know the lines. By the time the clock struck 3, I realized I hadn't spoken to anyone for hours. The silence pressed in, broken only by the distant sound of footsteps in the hallway and the soft, rhythmic creak of someone pacing outside. I told myself it was just another night shift. But deep down, I knew better. Something about this place was wrong, and I was only just beginning to see it. It didn't take long before I started noticing patterns, habits that went beyond simple quirks. The guests here weren't just odd, they were ritualistic, bound to routines that felt more like compulsions than preferences. I started keeping a mental list, half out of boredom, half out of a growing sense that these patterns were more important than I realized. The first rule I learned was about the man in room 2. He was middle-aged, with thinning hair and a nervous energy that made my skin crawl. Every night, he'd come to the front desk just before midnight, always with the same request, a cup of black coffee, no sugar, no cream. He'd stand there, eyes fixed on the clock, waiting for the second hand to hit 12. If I tried to make small talk, he'd ignore me, staring straight ahead until the coffee was ready. But one night, I made the mistake of asking him how his evening was going, just as the clock struck 12. He froze, coffee cup halfway to his lips, and his eyes flicked to mine with a look of pure panic. Without a word, he turned and hurried back to his room, slamming the door behind him. The next morning, I found a deep scratch gouged into the front of the desk, right where he'd been standing. Then there was the guest in room 5, a woman with long, dark hair who never spoke above a whisper. She'd leave notes for me at the front desk, always folded into perfect squares, always written in looping, elegant script. The messages were never requests, just strange, cryptic phrases. Don't look in the mirror after 2 a.m. or if you hear singing, cover your ears. I tried to ask her about them once, but she just smiled, shook her head, and slipped away. I started collecting the notes, tucking them into the back of the logbook. I couldn't help but wonder if they were warnings, or just the ramblings of someone who'd spent too many nights alone. The strangest of all was the man in room 8. He was tall, with a face I could never quite remember, and he insisted on being given the same key every night, key number 17, even though the rooms only went up to 12. The first time he asked, I thought he was joking. But he just stared at me, unblinking, until I handed over the key. I checked the key ring later, and sure enough, there was a key labeled 17, old and tarnished, with a tag that looked like it had been burned at the edges. He'd return it every morning, always with a nod, never a word. I never saw him enter or leave his room, but I'd hear footsteps pacing back and forth behind the door, sometimes all night long. The more I watched, the more rules I uncovered. The woman in room 4 never left her room after dark. The man in the suit would only pace the parking lot at 3:13 a.m., never a minute before or after. The guest in room 9 would only accept towels folded a certain way, 3 times, lengthwise, never widthwise. If I got it wrong, she'd call the desk and whisper, "Try again," before hanging up. I started to wonder what would happen if I broke one of these rules. Would the man in room 2 come back to the desk, or would he just disappear? What if I read one of the notes out loud, or gave the wrong key to the man in room 8? The possibilities gnawed at me, a constant itch at the back of my mind. I found myself double-checking every task, replaying every interaction in my head, terrified of making a mistake I didn't understand. Sometimes, I'd catch the guests watching me, their eyes following my every move. It felt like they were waiting for something, for me to slip up, to test the boundaries of their strange rituals. I started to realize that the real danger wasn't in the rules themselves, but in what might happen if I broke them. The motel was a stage, and I was the only one who didn't know my lines. Every night, I wondered how long I could keep up the act before something, or someone, decided I'd gone off script. It was only a matter of time before my curiosity got the better of me. The monotony of the night shift, the endless hours of silence broken only by the hum of the vending machine and the occasional ring of the front desk phone, started to wear me down. I told myself I was just trying to understand the place, to make sense of the rules that seemed to govern every guest's life. But the truth was, I wanted to know what would happen if I pushed back, just a little. The first time I broke a rule, it was almost by accident. I was sorting through the logbook, organizing the cryptic notes left by the woman in room 5, when I found one I hadn't seen before. It was folded differently, tucked between 2 pages near the back. The message was simple: "If you read this out loud, you'll hear her voice." I stared at it for a long time, the words looping in my mind. I was alone in the lobby, the clock ticking past 2 in the morning. On impulse, I whispered the note aloud. At first, nothing happened. I let out a shaky laugh, feeling foolish. But then, from somewhere down the hall, I heard singing, a soft, lilting melody, just on the edge of hearing. It grew louder, closer, until it seemed to be coming from right behind the front desk. I spun around, heart pounding, but there was no one there. The song faded as quickly as it had started, leaving only the echo of my own ragged breathing. I shoved the note back into the logbook and tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. But the next night, I found another note, this one addressed to me by name. "Don't do that again," it read, the handwriting sharper, almost angry. I glanced up and saw the woman from room 5 standing at the end of the hallway, her eyes fixed on me. She didn't move, didn't blink, just watched until I looked away. After that, the boundaries felt thinner, the air heavier. I started noticing things I hadn't before, the way the lights in the hallway would flicker whenever I passed room 2, or how the temperature would drop outside room 8, cold enough to make my breath fog. One night, I found myself standing outside room 7, the one Stan had warned me about. The door was closed, the number barely visible beneath layers of chipped paint. I hesitated, then knocked, just once, softly. The response was immediate. The lights in the hallway snapped off, plunging me into darkness. I heard a shuffling sound from inside the room, something heavy dragging across the floor. A low, guttural whisper seeped through the door, words I couldn't understand. I stumbled back, heart racing, and the lights flickered back on. The door remained closed, but I could feel something watching me from the other side, pressing against the thin barrier of wood and paint. I tried to shake it off, but the sense of being watched only grew. The guests seemed to know when I'd broken a rule. The man in room 2 stopped coming for coffee, but I'd catch glimpses of him in the reflection of the lobby window, standing just behind me, his eyes wide and unblinking. The woman in room 9 started calling more frequently, her voice barely a whisper, asking if I'd seen anything unusual. The man in room 8 left his key on the counter one morning, the metal ice cold to the touch, and when I picked it up, I saw a thin line of frost creeping across my fingers. The worst was the night I spoke to the man in the suit after midnight. He was pacing the parking lot, as always, but this time he stopped and looked directly at me through the glass. I opened the door, meaning to ask if he was all right, but as soon as the words left my mouth, he froze. His head snapped toward me, his face twisting into something that wasn't quite human, his mouth too wide, his eyes too dark. He let out a sound that was halfway between a scream and a laugh, and the air around him seemed to ripple, distorting the world like heat rising off asphalt. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my hands shaking. After that, the motel felt different. The walls seemed thinner, the shadows deeper. I started hearing things at night, scratching at the windows, footsteps in empty rooms, voices whispering my name from the vents. I realized then that the rules weren't just for the guests, they were for me, too. Every infraction, every test, was noticed. The guests were watching, waiting to see how far I'd go. And I was starting to understand that some boundaries weren't meant to be crossed. It happened on a night that started like any other, quiet, heavy with the kind of stillness that makes you feel like you're the last person left in the world. I was behind the desk, half asleep, when the man from room 8 came in. He didn't say a word, just held out his hand for his key. I reached for the ring, but my mind was foggy, my fingers clumsy from too many sleepless nights. Without thinking, I handed him the wrong key, key number 9 instead of 17. He stared at it for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then, without a word, he turned and walked down the hall. I didn't realize my mistake until I saw the real key 17 still dangling from the ring, its tag scorched and cold. My stomach dropped. I thought about running after him, but something in the air stopped me, a pressure, like the motel itself was holding its breath. That's when everything started to unravel. The lights in the lobby flickered, then went out completely, plunging me into darkness. The only illumination came from the neon sign outside, its red glow bleeding through the windows and painting everything in sickly, shifting shadows. I fumbled for my phone, but the screen was dead, the battery inexplicably drained. The silence was absolute, so thick it felt like cotton in my ears. Then, from somewhere down the hall, I heard a door slam. Footsteps echoed, too many, too fast, as if every guest in the motel had started moving at once. I pressed myself against the wall, heart pounding, as shapes flickered past the frosted glass of the lobby door. I caught glimpses of faces, distorted, stretched, their eyes too wide, their mouths moving in silent screams. I tried to call out, to apologize, but my voice caught in my throat. The air was freezing, each breath burning in my lungs. I stumbled toward the hallway, desperate to fix my mistake, to find the man from room 8 and give him the right key. But the corridor was wrong, longer than it should have been, the doors spaced unevenly, numbers flickering and changing as I passed. Room 8 was gone, replaced by a door with no number at all. I reached for the handle, but it was ice cold, burning my skin. I forced it open and stepped inside. The room was nothing like the others. The walls were covered in mirrors, each one reflecting a different version of myself, older, younger, twisted in ways that made my stomach churn. In the center of the room stood the man from room 8, holding the wrong key in his hand. He looked up, and for the first time, I saw his face clearly. It was blank, featureless, as if someone had wiped it clean. He held out the key to me, and I took it, my hand shaking. The mirrors began to vibrate, the reflections warping and shifting. I heard voices, dozens of them, all whispering at once, their words overlapping and impossible to understand. The air grew thick, pressing in on me from all sides. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, but there was no handle, no way out. The man stepped closer, his movements jerky and unnatural. He pressed the key into my palm, his grip ice cold. "You broke the rule," he whispered, his voice echoing from every mirror. "You have to fix it." I stumbled back, clutching the key. The mirrors showed the other guests now, each one standing in their rooms, staring at their own reflections, their faces twisted in fear or rage. I saw the woman from room 5, her eyes black and endless, her mouth moving in silent warning. I saw the man in the suit, pacing the parking lot, his shadow stretching out behind him like a living thing. The pressure in the room grew unbearable. I dropped to my knees, gasping for air. The voices grew louder, chanting in a language I didn't understand. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the sound was inside my head, drilling into my thoughts. Then, just as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The mirrors went dark, the voices fell silent. I was alone in the room, the key still clutched in my hand. I forced myself to my feet and stumbled back into the hallway, which had returned to normal, short, familiar, the doors in their proper places. But the motel wasn't the same. The air was charged, electric, as if a storm was about to break. The guests were out of their rooms, standing in the hallway, their eyes fixed on me. They didn't speak, didn't move, just watched as I made my way back to the lobby. I knew what I had to do. I found the man from room 8, standing by the front desk, his face still blank. I handed him the correct key, number 17. He took it, nodded once, and disappeared down the hall. The other guests slowly returned to their rooms, doors closing softly behind them. The lights flickered back on, the air warmed, and the silence returned, this time, heavier, more oppressive. I slumped behind the desk, shaking, my mind racing. I'd broken a rule, and the motel had punished me for it. But I'd fixed it, barely. I glanced at the clock. Dawn was still hours away. I didn't know if I could make it until sunrise, but I knew one thing for certain, the rules weren't just for the guests. They were for me, too. And the motel never forgot a mistake. I barely had time to catch my breath before the motel changed again. The air thickened, humming with a low, electric tension that made the hairs on my arms stand up. The lights overhead flickered, then steadied, casting everything in a harsh, unnatural glow. I could hear doors opening, one after another, the sound echoing down the hallway like a slow, deliberate drumbeat. I looked up and saw them, the guests, emerging from their rooms, moving in unison. Their faces were pale, eyes wide and unblinking, each one fixed on me. The woman from room 4 stood at the front, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, lips pressed into a thin line. The man in the suit hovered just behind her, his shadow stretching impossibly long across the lobby floor. The woman from room 5 clutched a stack of her cryptic notes, her gaze sharp and accusing. They formed a semicircle around the front desk, silent and expectant. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. The man from room 8 was last to arrive, holding key 17 in his hand. He stepped forward, and the others parted to let him through. "You broke the rule," he said, his voice echoing with a strange, hollow resonance. "You gave me the wrong key. You opened a door that should have stayed closed." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. "I fixed it. I gave you the right key. I didn't mean to." The woman from room 5 shook her head, her hair falling like a curtain over her face. "Intentions don't matter here. Only the rules." The man in the suit stepped forward, his eyes dark and bottomless. "We all have our rules. They keep us safe. They keep you safe. When you break them, you invite something in." A cold wind swept through the lobby, rattling the windows. The neon sign outside flickered, casting strange, shifting shadows across the guests' faces. I felt the motel itself watching, waiting for my next move. I tried to remember everything I'd learned, every pattern, every warning. I looked at the woman from room 5, at the notes she clutched in her hands. "You leave messages for me," I said, my voice trembling. "You warn me about things. Why?" She stepped closer, her eyes boring into mine. "Because you're new. Because you don't know the dangers yet. But you're learning. You have to learn, or you won't survive." The man from room 2, the one who never spoke after midnight, finally broke his silence. "We're not like you. We're bound to this place, to our routines. If we stray, if we forget, we're lost. The rules are all we have." The guests began to close in, their faces blurring at the edges, their voices overlapping in a rising chorus. "You broke the rule. You broke the rule. You broke the rule." I backed away, pressing myself against the wall. The room seemed to stretch and contract, the floor tilting beneath my feet. The mirrors from room 8 flashed in my mind, each one showing a different version of myself, some terrified, some angry, some already gone. I forced myself to think. There had to be a way out, a way to appease them. I remembered Stan's words, "Don't interfere. Don't try to help. Respect their rules, even if you don't understand them." I raised my hands, palms open. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to break the rules. Tell me what I have to do. I'll make it right." The guests paused, exchanging glances. The woman from room 4 spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You must restore what was broken. Balance must be kept." The man from room 8 held out key 17. "Take it. Return it to where it belongs. Close the door you opened." I took the key, my hand shaking. The guests parted, forming a path down the hallway. The motel seemed to pulse around me, the walls breathing in and out, the floorboards creaking in anticipation. I walked down the hall, the guests following in silent procession. The door with no number waited at the end, its surface slick with condensation. I slid the key into the lock, feeling a jolt of cold shoot up my arm. The door swung open, revealing the mirrored room, now empty and still. I stepped inside, the guests crowding the doorway behind me. I placed the key on the nightstand, just as I'd found it. The mirrors shimmered, the reflections aligning, each one showing me as I was, tired, frightened, but still myself. A deep, resonant hum filled the room, vibrating through my bones. The air warmed, the tension easing. The guests began to fade, their forms dissolving into mist, their voices fading into silence. I stumbled back into the hallway, the door closing softly behind me. The motel was quiet again, the lights steady, the air calm. The guests had returned to their rooms, their doors closed, their rules restored. I made my way back to the lobby, collapsing behind the desk. My hands shook, my heart racing, but I was alive. I'd survived their judgment, this time. But I knew, deep down, that the rules were always waiting, always watching. And the next mistake might be my last. The motel was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence, one that felt earned, like the hush after a storm. I sat behind the front desk, my hands still trembling, watching the first hints of dawn creep through the grimy windows. The neon sign outside finally sputtered out, leaving only the pale blue of early morning to light the lobby. I tried to steady my breathing, to convince myself it was over, that I'd made it through the night. But the memory of the guests' faces, their voices echoing in my mind, told me otherwise. I didn't hear Stan come in. One moment I was alone, the next he was standing behind the counter, looking at me with those tired, knowing eyes. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. He just glanced at the logbook, then at the hallway, and finally back at me. "You made it," he said, his voice low and almost gentle. "Not everyone does." I wanted to ask him what he meant, to demand answers about the guests, the rules, the things I'd seen. But the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I just nodded, feeling older than I had the night before. Stan poured himself a cup of coffee, grimacing at the taste. "You learn quick, or you don't last. That's the way of it here. The guests, they're not like us. They need their routines. Their rules. You break them, you pay the price. But you did what you had to. You restored the balance." He set the cup down and fixed me with a look that was almost pitying. "You'll start to see the patterns, if you stay long enough. The faces change, but the rules don't. Not really. There's always another night. Always another test." I wanted to tell him I was done, that I'd never work another shift here, but I knew it was a lie. Something about the motel had its hooks in me now. I could feel it, a pull, subtle but insistent, like gravity. I wondered if Stan had ever tried to leave, or if he'd just accepted his place in the cycle. As the sun crested the horizon, the motel seemed to exhale, the tension easing just a little. The guests' doors remained closed, their secrets safe for now. I thought about the rules, about how easily I could have slipped up again, and shuddered. The bell above the lobby door jingled, startling me from my thoughts. A new guest stepped inside, a young woman, travel-worn and bleary-eyed, dragging a battered suitcase behind her. She glanced around, taking in the faded wallpaper, the empty coffee pot, the tired faces behind the desk. "Do you have any vacancies?" she asked, her voice hopeful. Stan smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Always," he said, sliding the logbook toward her. As she signed her name, I caught a glimpse of the page, blank, waiting to be filled. I wondered what rules she'd bring with her, what rituals she'd follow, and what would happen if she broke them. Stan handed her a key, and she disappeared down the hall, her footsteps echoing in the quiet. He turned to me, his expression unreadable. "Get some rest," he said. "You'll need it. Night comes quick around here." I watched him walk away, the weight of the night settling on my shoulders. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me, that the cycle would never end. The guests would keep coming, each with their own rules, their own secrets. And I would be here, watching, waiting, trying not to make the same mistake twice. The motel was awake again, and so was I. If you're ever desperate enough to take a job like mine, remember this: the rules aren't just there to keep order. Sometimes, they're the only thing standing between you and something you can't explain, something that doesn't care if you're tired, or scared, or just trying to do your best. I used to think the strangest thing about working nights at a highway motel would be the loneliness, or maybe the occasional drifter with a story to tell. I was wrong. It's the guests you have to watch. The ones who follow their own rules, who move through the world like shadows, always one step out of sync with the rest of us. I still hear things at night, soft footsteps in empty hallways, the hum of voices behind closed doors. Sometimes I catch a glimpse of my own reflection in the lobby window and wonder if I'm starting to change, too. If the rules are working their way into me, making me part of the motel's endless cycle. Before I end this, there's one last thing you should know. This morning, after the new guest checked in, I glanced at the logbook. There was a fresh entry, written in a hand I didn't recognize. No name, just a room number, 13. The motel only has 12 rooms. Underneath, in shaky red ink, someone had scrawled, "Do not disturb. Do not acknowledge. Do not let them check out." So if you ever find yourself on a lonely stretch of highway, passing a flickering neon sign, think twice before you stop for the night. Some places have rules for a reason. And some guests, well, some guests are just passing through. Others are here to stay. If you want to know what happens the next time a new guest checks in, or if you're curious about the secrets behind room 13, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. The next story could drop any night, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming.